So what you should have in front of you is you should have two sides of the poem of Yom Zeh Mechubad that we sing on Shabbat, with another poem, Om Nitzara, which is the poem for Hoshana from Shabbat on Sukkot, that we don't do the Hakafot with the Lulav and Etrog. There's a special poem that we have for Hoshana for Shabbat. And the page that says Yom Zeh Mechubad Mikorot, the source page for the song Yom Zeh Mechubad. So all of you should have it. Either you have it on one page or you have it on the stapled inside of the two-part. Okay. Let me just start it off with. They jazzed it up. They have an orchestra there, a quartet with jazz music. I don't know, when we sing it in our house, it doesn't have that spunk. Yom Zeh Mechubad Mikol Olamim. Okay, so who wrote it? So in all these Mironim, all the benchers that we have, so you're going to be able to see very clearly the Yud of Yom, right? The Sheshet Yamim is the Shin. Rishon Hu is the Reish. Echol Mashmanim is the Aleph. And Lo Techsar is the Lamed. And then there's Hashemayim Misaprim Kvodo V'gam Haaretz Malach Hosdo. What exactly is that? But it does spell out Yisrael. And the immediate knee-jerk reaction is to assign authorship to Rabbi Yisrael Najara from the 16th century, the Chachmei Tzfat, in the days of Rabbi Yosef Karo in Tzfat, in the days of Rabbi Moshe Alshich, in the days of Rabbi Yaakov Bei Rav. There was a whole group of the 16th century, including Shlomo Levi Al-Kavatz, who authors the Lecha Dodi. This is a story in itself, which we'll elaborate on when we do the Lecha Dodi. But Yisrael Najara is an interesting person because he's found in three locations, one being Tzfat, but he was also in the Beit Knesset in Gaza City. There was a shul there that was excavated many years ago. There was a beautiful mosaic that was taken away and brought to the Museum Yerushalayim, the mosaic of the shul of Gaza, and an apocryphal story of my family. And I always say that because my kids will always say that never happened. But nevertheless, I believe that once my son was going into Gaza with the troops many, many years ago, and he's not allowed to tell us that he's doing something like that. But all he asked me was, where exactly is the mosaic of the shul in Gaza? I said, what do you have to know? He said, well, we might be davening mincha there tomorrow. Oh, now I think he's going to deny that ever happened. So it shows my keen sense of imagination. But nevertheless, Yisrael Najara was there. But where was Yisrael Najara? Where does his fame actually begin? In Aleppo, which is Halab in Syria, as a nightclub singer. He was not religious. And somebody saw him and was impressed with his inner talents, his spirituality, and somehow got a hold of him. Maybe some Lubavitcher of the 16th century, or somebody from Esha Torah, or some of these Baal Tshuva yeshivas, and brought him and schlepped him to Tzfat, and he becomes a great, great person with great spirituality in his poems, very, very talented, and he composed many, many of our Hebrew poems, religious poems, Zemirot, and so on. Having said all that, he's not the author of Yom Zeh Mechubad. This is the spoiler. It turns out that there was someone in the 12th century, 400 years before Rabbi Yisrael Najara, who was known as Rabbi Yisrael HaGer, the convert. So he was a convert of the 12th century, and he spells out his name Yisrael, like many of the medieval poets would use the apocryphal idea of, not apocryphal, the acrostic of using his name and weaving it into 12th century, right? And what's happening is that you have the Yud, the Shin, you have the Resh, the Aleph and Lamed, it spells out Yisrael. And what happens with Hashamayim Misrafim Kvodo V'gam Haaretz Malach Chazdo, that's a Hey. And where does that factor in? And the answer is, if you look at the page that I printed, so Hashamayim is a Hey, and then there's Gam. Of course, it's Vigam. The Gimel was accentuated, and the next line is a Resh. It's Ha-Ger. He writes, Yisrael Ha-Ger. So we know that this is somebody who did live and did exist. I don't have exactly any other biographical information, but he's the author of Yom Mechubad. But let's take it from the top. Yom Mechubad Mikol Yamim. It's the day that's most honored from all the other days. Why? Kivo Shabbat Tzur HaOlamim, because God rested. Tzur HaOlamim is a reference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we're going to see it at the end of the poem also. The last line, Kihu Hatzur Pa'alo Tamim. Where does that come from? Where do we see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a tzur? From? Hazinu. Right. Devarim Perek Lamed Bet. Hatzur Tamim Pa'alo Kichol Derachav Mishpat El Emunah Ve'ein Avel Tzadik V'yasharhu. Now, in a word, that pasuk is known as Tziduk Hadin. Tziduk Hadin is to say, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Olam Dayan Emet. Something horrific happened, and all we say is, Kadosh Baruch Hu is the Dayan Emet. Hatzur Tamim Pa'alo Kichol Derachav Mishpat. El Emunah Ve'ein Avel. There's nothing that you can say wrong with God. Tzadik V'yasharhu. It's somehow justifying the horrible situation and saying Kadosh Baruch Hu has a reason why he's doing it. That's called Tziduk Adin. And when we say this pasuk, we say it at Levias. The Chevra Kadisha person is going to say this pasuk at the end of the Hespedim. Matzur Tamim Pa'alo Kichol Derachav Mishpat El Emunah Ve'ein Avel Tzadik V'yasharhu. So exactly why the author of Yom Mechubad, and is going to glorify everything we know about Shabbat, is going to end it with the pasuk from Ha'azinu, from Hatzur Tamim Pa'alo, Kihu Hatzur Pa'alo Tamim. And he gives us an insight on the second line that he's going to refer to the Tzur. Kibo Shavat Tzur Ha'olamim. The rock. Tzur means a rock. It means the foundation of of the whole world, of the universe, of the whole creation. He rested. Now that's gracious, right? V'varach Elokim et Yom HaShvi'i v'Kadesh Oto, Kivo Shavat Mikol Melachto Asher Bara Elohim Lasot. That's in Vaychulu Hashemayim. So fine. So we understand that on Shabbat, the Kadosh Baruch Hu is doing the resting. The word Tzur is fascinating when it comes to Medinat Yisrael, because in 1948, at the writing of the Declaration of Independence, the Megillat Atzmaut, there was a big issue about whether Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to have a presence in there or not. And of course, the religious parties, the Mizrahi and even the Aguda, they were very interested that there should be some reference to Kadosh Baruch Hu. And the secular Zionists didn't want God in the picture. Of course, Ben Gurion insisted that there had to be something about Nevi'ei Yisrael, and it's there. It's there. Okay. It was the message of the prophets, the future would come, that Am Yisrael would come back to Eretz Yisrael. Yeah, that's there in the Megillat Atzmaut. But, you can read the Nevi'im with a secular eye. So, Mitoch Ve'Yisrael, that's okay. But they made a compromise. V'haboteach b'tzur Yisrael. Now, once you see that, anybody who davens, that's good. Tzur Yisrael, Kuma Bezrat Yisrael, we say it every day in the morning, right before Shemon Esrei. Who's the Tzur Yisrael? Obviously. But if you want, you can interpret Tzur Yisrael as the destiny of Am Yisrael. Giving it, lacking some religious connotation and reading it in a secular way. And they said, okay, beseder, so it's OUisrael. So they made a compromise. You can read it the way you want to read it, and a Kadosh Baruch Hu is there. The only thing is that the first minister of religious affairs, Rav Maimon, he wasn't happy with that. Rav Maimon, when he signs his name, he writes Bezrat Hashem Yitbarach, Yehuda Leib HaKohen Fishman Maimon. So it was like part of his signature. But he writes Bezrat Hashem Yitbarach that he was adamant that a Kadosh Baruch Hu had to be there, not just hiding on the OUisrael. But so there was a story there. So here, Yom Ze Mechubad Mikol Yomim, it's the day that's most Mechubad. Why is it the most Mechubad? What could be behind that statement? If you take all the other days, Yom Rishon until Yom Shishi, so Yom Shabbat is the most Mechubad. Well, it's going to spell it out. What's so Mechubad about it? The thing is that I brought along a sefer called Otzar Tzfilot. This is just volume 1 of 2 volumes. You see, it's pretty fat. And it was given to me by a distant cousin who was no longer with us, and then he was not a youngster at my bar mitzvah, and he gave it to me as a bar mitzvah gift. And I have the inscription even. He was a Rav in the Lower East Side. Those who know the turf of the Lower East Side, there was a street called, there was Clinton Street, and there was Attorney Street, and there was the Lancey. The Lancey was the most important, but this is between Attorney Street and I just blanking out now.
Attorney Ridge Pitt.
Not Pitt. Keep going.
Sheriff Street.
No. Okay, but kids, there was a shul. My grandfather had a milking restaurant there. He lived on Attorney Street, but it was right around the corner. No, okay. That's too far. Rivington, Stanton. There we go. Stanton Street. Stanton Street. That's right, Stanton Street. So across the street from my grandfather's milking restaurant, there was a shul, and this Rav Yosef Singer was the Rav. His father, his name was Rav David Singer, and I don't want to go to the whole mishpachtologia, was a Ki'ilu son-in-law of my great-grandfather, and he became the Rav of the town that my great-grandfather was the Rav, Pilsno in Poland, and my father actually was named after this Rav David Singer. The son is Rav Yosef Singer, and we were very particularly close to him, and he gave me this bar mitzvah gift. And I use this sparingly. It's a type of anthology of perushim on the Siddur. And the problem is he doesn't give us source material. He just writes it as it's all over the place. But what I'm going to read to you now is most probably something that has, for sure, midrashic source or Kabbalistic Zohar source. I tried my best on my project Ashut in the Bar Ilan to bring it up and get the original. I still haven't located, but it's still and that's why I'm reading it now secondhand. But it's nevertheless a very, very interesting thought. And that was that the kavanah, the intention of Yom Zeh Mechubad, why was it so honored from all the other days? That when Kadosh Baruch Hu created the world, he actually created 6 days. And each day would have 28 hours. Now that's not exactly going to break it down into 6. Right? There are going to be some extra hours if that happens. Or the day would have, the reason is, the day would have 28 hours, and there would be 6 days of 28 hours, and then it would repeat 6 days of 28 hours. Somehow a phenomenal thought. But the days themselves were arguing who's going to be the leader. Who's going to be the leader? So Kadosh Baruch Hu said, what he'll do is take 4 hours out of each day and shrink each day to 24 hours and create a 7th day of 24 hours. So by removing 4 days out of the day of 28 days, so now you have 6 days of 24 hours and a 7th day of 24 hours. And the days agreed that this 7th day would be the leader of all. And because each day contributed to the Shabbos by 4 hours, they realized that they had a part in it. They were part, and it wasn't like an outsider coming. It wasn't that a Kadosh Baruch Hu took a 7th day and shipped it in, but the 7th day was actually born out of each of the 6 days. each day donated 4 hours for the creation of the Shabbat, and they all bestowed the crown on Shabbat as being something very, very special. It's a wild idea, obviously, a nice story, but it could be that the author of the Yom Mechubad had this in mind, that the day was Mechubad mikol yomim, from all the days. In other words, it's kavod, basically nourished from the fact that all the other days contributed something to the creation of the day of Shabbat. Again, I'm not signing on the dotted line. I'm presenting it as an interesting thought, that certainly does not have any halachic roots to it, but most probably has midrashic/kabbalistic roots to it. And now we get to the poem itself, because that's the refrain. Yom ze mechubad mikol yamim, kivo Shabbat mikol olamim. We get to the refrain. Sheshit yamim taseh melachtecha, right? 6 days you do your work. V'yom hashvi lelokecha. 7th day is dedicated to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shabbat lo taseh bo melacha. On the 7th day you don't do work. Ki kol asar sheshit yamim. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu made all the days on the sixth day. Now, this stanza, just flip the side, on the page of sources. Again, if you have the 2-page, so I'm on the side that says Yom Ze Mechubad Mekorot. We're not looking at the source page of last week of Imon and TORAH. I'm on the flip side. Yom Ze Mechubad Mekorot, the sources. If we just look at source number 1, that's the Aseret HaDibrot. Zochot Yom Shabbat L'Kacho, from Parshat Yitro. And here, I've highlighted basically what the poet did was he lifted out of context, but just abbreviated it somewhat, just to squeeze it into poetic form. But you can see that he's taking it out of these lines. Sheshit yamim tavod vasita kol melachtecha is precisely Sheshit yamim taseh melachtecha, and then the next line in the Aseret HaDibrot, v'yom hashvi Shabbat l'Hashem Elokecha lo taseh kol melacha, and the poem has it as well. V'yom hashvi Elokecha Shabbat lo taseh bo melacha. Kichol asar sheshit yamim, that's the end, where he says in Shabbat, where it says Ki sheshit yamim asar Hashem et hashamayim et haaretz et yom v'kolbam v'yanach ma'ashvi, and so on. You can see that the first stanza, the poet has the Aseret HaDibrot, the 4th diber, the 4th saying of the Aseret HaDibrot, which is Shabbat, and he's lifting it out of context and just writing it in poetic form. Sheshit yamim taseh melachtecha, v'yom hashvi lelokecha, Shabbat lo taseh melacha, kichol asar sheshit yamim. Fine, that's going to be easy. Then comes the next stanza, Rishon hu lemikra'ei kodesh, Yom Shabbaton, Yom Shabbat Kodesh. Now here we're going to have to split, because the first 2 lines are somewhat connected to the first stanza, and the next 2 lines are going to be connected to the 3rd stanza. So if you just see the 3rd stanza for the continuation for a moment, Al kain kol ish b'yeino yekadesh. Therefore, every person is going to say kiddush on wine. He's going to sanctify the day over a cup of wine. And al shtei lechem yivtzeu tmimim, on 2 loaves of bread, he's going to cut. The word botzeya has to do with slicing bread. We have the concept bitziat hapat, the laws of slicing bread. It's in Shulchan Aruch. With regard to when you make a maitzi, when do you cut the bread? Before the bracha, and with regard to challah. So if you're eating sliced bread at home during the weekday, so you make your maitzi before you eat the bread. But if you have a whole loaf or even a lachmaniyah, a whole roll, so the question is, when do you make the maitzi? Do you make it before you slice it or cut it or rip it apart, or after? There's some halachic discussion about it, so much so that you know what the custom is with the challahs on Friday night? To take the knife and make a little indentation, ke'ilu, to recognize that there's a view that says that the bracha should be made after the challah is cut. So we accept the opinion that we cut the challah before the challah is cut, and not the view after. But to show that there is actually a view out there that says that we should be making the bracha after the challah is cut, we make a little line in the challah, a little indentation, and so that maybe the view that the bracha should be made after the challah is cut. So I cut the challah. How much did I cut? Not much, because I want to make the bracha before I cut the challah. So it's a compromise. It almost reminds me of the machloket. How do you place your mezuzah on the door, vertical or horizontal? There are two different opinions, whether it's supposed to be horizontal or vertical. So what Ashkenazim do? Neither, right? We do it vertical. We do it diagonal. We do it diagonal, but the diagonal is more tilted to the vertical, not to the horizontal. It's not supposed to be 45-degree angle where it's just in between. It's supposed to be 60 degrees, right? It's supposed to be a little bit closer to being vertical than horizontal, but nevertheless it's diagonal. It's to show that there is a view out there that says that it's not vertical. That it's Sfardim just do vertical. For Sfardim, they decided how the mezuzah should be. It's vertical, and that's it. Yeah. So if the parasha was put, horizontal, that's according to some opinions. So you may be aware of somebody who's still hanging on to that view. But most Ashkenazim aren't doing that. Most Ashkenazim are putting it diagonal, but basically favoring the view of the vertical. I'm just using this as an example. So here, we're not cutting the challah, but we are cutting the challah. We're making a little line in it. That's it. So that's called b'tziat hapat. That's the word botzea. Botzea is also used in the Gemara for compromise in judgment. Where the Masechet Sanhedrin it says that the Dayanim should actually offer a compromise instead of making one side the winner or one side the absolute loser. That compromise is a type of mishpat sheyesh bo shalom. It's compromise, but there's an element of harmony because nobody is a total winner and nobody is a total loser. And the Gemara calls it botzea. It uses the same word. So here too, we're actually compromising with the challah, with the machloket, with the dispute, whether you should say the bracha before the cutting or after the cutting. So we make a little line on it. But that's what it's called b'tziat hapat. Al shtei lechem yivtzeu tmimim. Here, this can go two ways. Either it's a reference to the chalas that should be whole, right? You don't take a 1.5 chalas. That you only take on Seder night when you have lechamoni, a broken matzah. You make a bracha on a broken matzah. But during the year, it's lechem mishnah. It has to be whole. Or tmimim is a reference to Am Yisrael. We just flip again to the source page where it says source number 5. It says from Dvarim Parshat Shoftim, Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. You are supposed to be whole. Whole means complete, perfect, and doesn't mean naive in this sense. It does not mean naive. Here, tamim tiyeh Hashem Elokecha, you should be complete, which means wholesome, and not incomplete, but complete. And the next source says, Atem hadveikim b'Hashem Elokechem shchayim kulchem hayom. You should be connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it seems that the poet is using these two psukim because in the stanza that I just read, Al shtei lechem yisu tmimim, in the next stanza, he's going to say, Echol mashmanim shtei mamtakim, you should eat fat food and drink sweet drinks. Ki el yiten l'chol bo dveikim. God gave it to you. Who are the dveikim? Also, Am Yisrael. So the dveikim comes from the pasuk Atem hadveikim b'Hashem Elokechem, and the tmimim comes from Tamim tiyeh Hashem Elokecha. So Al shtei lechem yivtzu tmimim is talking about lechem mishnah. And what's the matter? You do have the sources. If you have the you rip the page. There's another page that goes with this. Last week I gave you 2 pages. Yeah. The okay, Pisana. The poet in the second stanza, Rishon hu lemikra'ei kodesh, Yom Shabbaton, Yom Shabbat Kodesh. I'm going to connect this with the first stanza, but then he continues something about our meals of Shabbat. Al kain kol ish b'yeino yekadesh. We have kiddush on wine. Al shtei lechem yiftzeu tmimim. On two breads, the tmimim, Am Yisrael, will slice. Echol mashmanim shtei mamtakim. We will eat good, delicious, luxurious foods and drink sweet drinks. Ki el yitain bo lechol bo dvekim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave it to his dvekim, those who are connected to him. What did he give? Beged lilbosh, lechem chukim, basar v'dagim b'chol matamim. So this has all to do with food. Foods. So let's go back to the second stanza and read the first two lines again. Rishon hu lemikra'ei kodesh, Yom Shabbaton, Yom Shabbat Kodesh. What exactly does this mean? What does this mean? What does it mean, Rishon hu lemikra'ei kodesh? So now we're going to flip to the sources and look at source number 2. It's from Parshat Emor. In Parshat Emor, which we call Parshat HaMo'adot. It's Vayikra Perek Gimel. In Parshat Perek Gimel, the Torah delineates all of the Chagim. And all of the Chagim are Pesach, and then continuing with Sfirat HaOmer to Shavuot, and then Rosh Hashanah, and then Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot, and it ends with Vaydaber Moshe et Moadei Hashem b'nei Yisrael. That's how it ends. How does it begin? It begins with Eile Moadei Hashem Mikra'ei Kodesh Asher Tikru'u Otam B'Moadam. Right? Look at source number 2. Daber b'nei Yisrael v'marta alehem. Speak to b'nei Yisrael and say to them, Moadei Hashem Asher Tikru'u Otam Mikra'ei Kodesh. Here are the Yamim Tovim that are assigned the title Mikra'ei Kodesh. They are called Kodesh. They are called Kodesh. Who calls them Kodesh? Who decides the fact that the Chagim are Kodesh? Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael. As opposed to Shabbat, where it's Vayvarach Elukim et Yom HaShvi'i Vayakadesh Oto, who assigned holy status to Shabbat? Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kivo Shabbat Mikom Melachto Asher bara Elukim Lasot. Kadosh Baruch Hu rested on the seventh day, and he assigned that it's going to be a day of Kedusha. Whereas when we talk about the Chagim, it's Ele Moadei Hashem Mikra'ei Kodesh Asher Tikru'u Otam B'Moadam. Am Yisrael assigns it Kodesh. Am Yisrael. Through the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh and Ibur Hashanah, the mitzvah of sanctifying the moon monthly and 7 times after 19 years, according to our prepared calendar, we have leap years, so we assign Yom Tov status. And that's why in Musaf we say, Baruch Atah Hashem, Mekadesh Yisrael, V'Roshei Chodashim. And a Musaf on Yom Tov, Baruch Atah Hashem, Mekadesh Yisrael, V'Hazmanim. We assign the day as Yom Tov. And what's strange is that the whole section begins with Shabbat. Very strange. Taberu b'nei Yisrael v'mata lehem, Moadei Hashem asher tikru'u otam mikra'ei kodesh, Eilahem moadoi. Here are the Yomim Tovim. And how does it begin? Sheshet Yomim te'aseh melacha, v'yom hashvi Shabbat Shabbaton, mikra kodesh kol melacha lo ta'asu, Shabbat hi l'Hashem b'chol moshvotechem. Shabbat. It doesn't belong here. We're talking about the Yomim Tovim, the Chagim. And the very next pasuk, it takes a step back and says, Ele Moadei Hashem Mikra'ei Kodesh T'kotam Moadam Pesach. So why is Shabbos here? Now Rashi says something there, a drasha. Says, come to teach you that if you don't keep the Yomim Tovim, it's like you don't keep the Shabbat. Okay, that's a nice vort. It's a nice idea. But that's not the pshat. The pshat is that Shabbat belongs here. It's also part of the scheme of the Chagim. But one second, the scheme of Chagim is not the scheme of the Chagim is not creation. It's Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's the Exodus from Egypt. So why is Shabbat here? So if we already glance forward to the second set of the Aseret HaDibrot, which is in Parshat Bet Hanan, so there, in source number 3, we have the other reason for Shabbat. We all know that the second set of the Aseret HaDibrot, as opposed to Zachor, it says Shamor. Shamor Yom Shabbat Kachom. But to get to the reason of Shabbat, if you look at source 3, where it says Pasuk Tedvav, it says, V'zacharta ki ever hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim. V'yotziacha Hashem lekecha misham b'yad chazaka v'zorah netuya. Al kain tzivcha Hashem lekecha lasot et yom HaShabbat. The whole reason for Shabbat is Yetziat Mitzrayim. And that's the reason that you have to keep Shabbat. 1 second. Didn't I think that the reason for Shabbat is creation? And that's how it is in the first set of Aseret HaDibrot, in source number 1. Ki sheshet yamim asa Hashem et hashamayim et haaretz. God created the world in 6 days. Vayanach b'yom hashvi'i, and rested on the 7th day. Al kain berach Hashem et yom HaShabbat vayikacheu. That's why God sanctified Shabbat. Well, let's get it right. Is it creation or is it Yetziat Mitzrayim? And what's the answer? It's a machlokes in the Chumash. No, that can't be a machlokes in the Chumash. In the Rambam you can have a problem, but not in the Chumash. The answer is it's both. It's both. There are 2 sides to Shabbat. And the Vayikra Kav Gimel, source number 2, is playing on the second side of Shabbat. Is playing up the side that Shabbat has a place in the scheme of the Chagim. And in the Chagim it says, Eile Moadei Hashem Mikra'ei Kodesh. What's first on the list? Shabbat, before Pesach. And that's why we say on Friday night in Kiddush, every Friday night, we say, Zikaron Maseh Bereshit, Ki hu Yom Tchila LeMikra'ei Kodesh, Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim. It is first on the list of Mikra'ei Kodesh. Ki hu Yom Tchila LeMikra'ei Kodesh. And even if you're saying it like El Tazei the Nusach Hari, that it doesn't say Ki hu Yom, but it says Tchila LeMikra'ei Kodesh, Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim. It's first on the list of Vayikra Perek Kav Gimel, Eile Moadei Hashem Mikra'ei Kodesh. This is the scheme of the Yomim Tovim that are Mikra'ei Kodesh, and first on the list is Shabbat. And that's what the Paitan does here when he says, Rishonhu LeMikra'ei Kodesh, Yom Shabbatan, Yom Shabbat Kodesh. So you know what he did here? He fused together the theme of Shabbat of the first Aseret HaDibrot and the second, but instead of citing the second Aseret HaDibrot, he lifts it out of Parshat Emor, which is based on the fact that Shabbat has another side to it. It's also the side of Mikra'ei Kodesh, Yamim Tovim, Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim. And the one to give explanation to this, and go back to the source page on number 4, it's the Rambam in the Guide to the Perplexed, the Mer Nevuchim. And the Rambam says as follows: Kvar ba'u bezot ha-mitzvah shtei ilot. Ilah means reason. It's not alot, it means ilot. Mitchalfot. Mitchalfot means they are exchanging or oscillating, flipping back and forth. The reason for Shabbat flips from Parshat Yitro to Parshat Bet Hanan. Creation, Yetziat Mitzrayim. Creation, Yetziat Mitzrayim. Mipnei shehem l'shnei ilulim mitchatfim. V'zehu she'amar be'ilat higdil hashabat b'aseret hadibrot harishonot. Amar, God said, ki sheshet yemim asa Hashem, and so on. Ve'amar b'mishneh Torah. What is Mishneh Torah? The nickname for Sefer Dvarim. It's Parshat Bet Hanan. And in Mishneh Torah it reads, V'zacharta ki ever hayita b'Mitzrayim, al kain tzivcha Hashem Elokecha, and so on. V'zeh emet. Don't think it's a contradiction. The whole story is true. Ki ha'ilul, the reason, b'mamar rishon, hu kvod hayom v'higdilo kemo shekatuv, al kain vayrach Hashem et yom Shabbat v'kacheo. So here Rambam is saying it's kvod hayom. Maybe that's why the poet, who may have had some of these ideas in his head, said, Yom Zeh Mechubad Mikol Yamim. He may have even known this Rambam. He's a contemporary. He's a contemporary of the Rambam, this Yisrael Hager. And he says, Shabbat, as expressed in the first Aseret HaDibrot, expresses the greatness and the glory of Shabbat. Kvod Hayom. Al kain berach, because God created the world. Zeha ilul hanimshach leilul leilat kisheshet yamim. Omnam, however, there's another reason there's Shabbat. When we think about Bnei Yisrael in Mitzrayim, for the hundreds of years that they served in Mitzrayim as slaves, they never got a day off. There was no such thing as a vacation day. And even the atheistic communist Russia understood that for proper and good and healthy productivity, you have to give a worker a day off, right? Thank God it's Friday. Something to look forward to, a day that you don't go to work. So pure slavery is Nazi Germany. When we were Jews in the camps, there was no day off. There was no chofesh. It was work, 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 and work. The first thing Am Yisrael receives after they come out of the Yam Suf, and here they're free. They finally felt they were free. You know why we glorify the seventh day of Pesach with the Kriyat Yam Suf? Because until that happened, they didn't think they were free yet, because the Egyptians are running after them. And they actually believe the Egyptians are going to take them back. You know when they know that they're free? When they see the Yam Suf close up on the Egyptians, and the Medrash says that wasn't even good enough. The Medrash says that the Yam Suf regurgitated the bodies, and then on the Yam Suf bank, they say, we're free. Now they know we're free. Now we know it. Because they're dead. That's it. So what does he give them? So they walk 3 days in the desert, and the water in the jerrycans are empty. And it's a place that's called Marah. They find a body of water, but the water is contaminated. Can't drink it. So they complained to Moshe Rabbeinu, and they weren't out of line. The out of line was the tone. The Rav once taught us that it's not what you say, but how you say it makes all the difference. They didn't come to Moshe Rabbeinu and say, you know, the jerrycans are empty. Exactly what are we supposed to drink? No, they didn't do that. They came to Moshe and they said, what's going on here? No water. They panicked. Okay, so Kadosh Baruch Hu said, told Moshe Rabbeinu, take a bitter branch, that there was something there in the desert, and throw it into the bitter water, and sweet water is going to come out. And they called the place Marah. And what's interesting was that at that place of Marah, they received a tasting of Torah. This is 5.5 weeks before they get the Torah. 5.5 weeks before Sinai. Sham samlo chok u'mishpat v'sham nisahu. So they receive something of a tasting of Torah at that place. One of the mitzvot that Chazal say that we received was Shabbat. One was Shabbat. Why? Because Shabbat is both a chok and a mishpat. It's a sham lo chok u'mishpat v'sham nisahu. The chok and mishpat as a reflection of creation, that's a chok. Chukot shamayim va'aretz, Yirmiyahu says. Mishpat means it's civil law. Ela mishpatim asher tasim lefneihem. What was the civil law? Kadosh Baruch Hu said that you're going to have a day off. He didn't give them all of the malachot and all of the details of what Shabbat is. He gave them the concept that 1 day a week you are going to have off. And how did that express itself? Man started falling on Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi, Chamishi, Shishi, and on Shabbat it's not going to fall. You're going to get 2 portions of man on Friday and scoop it up. Lechem Mishnah, as it's called. Double amount of bread. Lechem Mishnah. And that's why we put 2 challahs on the table, because we want to remember that on Friday we received 2 portions of man. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu said on Shabbat, Al Yetzei Ish Min Komo B'Yom HaShvi'i. What was considered work in those days? Opening the door and scooping up the man. And the Medrash says that if you were a tzaddik, the man fell on your doorstep. And if you weren't such a tzaddik, you had to walk a little bit to get it. Everybody got it, but they had to work to get it. It wasn't terrible work. They had to walk out a few steps, maybe a few more steps, with a pail and a shovel, scoop it up, and that's breakfast. And Shabbat, they don't go to work. They can sleep late in the midbar, in the desert. They don't have to open the door because breakfast is already there. It was scooped up on Friday with the Lechem Mishnah. And therefore, Kadosh Baruch Hu gives Am Yisrael at Marah a tasting of Shabbat. And the Rambam says that was a rectification of a social injustice. That you have to have one day a week that you don't work. You're on chofesh, you're on vacation. And they got that vacation immediately after Mitzrayim, after they got out of Mitzrayim. That is the Zeiche Litziat Mitzrayim. And that's the Shabbat of Parshat Ve'etchanan and Dvarim. Ki v'zacharta ki eved hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim. Remember you were slaves, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu took you out. And therefore, you will pronounce the day of Shabbat, just like you pronounce the Chagim. So the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sanctifies the day of Shabbat as a day of remembering creation, we have nothing to do with that. That's God. Ki sheshet yamim asa Hashem et hashamayim v'et haaretz, et hayam v'et kol hashabam, v'yanach b'yom hashvi, al kein beirach Hashem. God sanctified that. But the part of Shabbat that is Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim, we, Am Yisrael, have to participate in the sanctification of Shabbat. So how do we do it? With Kiddush, Friday night. By making Kiddush Friday night, we sanctify the day. Yeah.
Don't you think it would be proper, according to what you're saying, that before the Motzi, you say Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim?
Yafeh. So Rivka asking a very, very good question. So Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim should be before saying Hamoitzi. Before Hamoitzi, before the Lechem Mishnah. Why the Kiddush? So we will understand that the Kiddush and the Lechem Mishnah is all part of one, and I'm going to prove this. If you're a Yekka, you know this. You wash Netilat Yadayim for the Lechem before Kiddush, right? And you make Kiddush, and then you sit down, after you drink the wine a little bit, you make the Baitzi together, it's all one package deal. And the truth of the matter is, I think it would be nice to all of us to be Yekkas. You know when? When you invite a lot of guests Friday night. Right. So first of all, you're seating everybody, you make Kiddush, then everybody has got to get up again to wash. The Yekkas have it right. What? You can't talk. What was that? Yeah.
And everybody is making Kiddush, but right before that, you already washed. Stand online.
Okay, but also, it's just wonderful when you have somebody who's a blabbermouth and then have them wash Netilat Yadayim. You want to wait with Hamaitzi because you're getting squeezed another 30 seconds out of his silence. Yeah.
Does the challah have to be on the table when the person is making it?
So, okay, I know. It certainly should be. It should be. And the minhag of covering the challah is very strange. Normally you'd make Hamaitzi as the first thing on the agenda. And here you're not. You're making a Bar Pri Agafen and a Mekadesh Shabbat. So in order not to embarrass the chalot, we cover the challah. That's one reason. The other reason is that the man was covered with dew. So the covering of the challah is to remind us that the man was also covered. But the Bale Musar, the Musar people of Lita, we went to town with this covering of the challah and saying, if you train yourself not to embarrass a challah, how much more so not to embarrass a human being, right? It's like, it's character building and training, beseda. So in truth, the challah is part and parcel, even though those who are not yekis and will wash afterwards, will make kiddush and wash afterwards. And by the way, it's a machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, what to do in the 8th parak of Masechet Brachot, and somehow the tradition of the German Jewish community was like Beit Shammai. So it's one of two things. Either they help, naturally, the Beseda, but in any case, to answer Rivka's question, it goes together. It goes together.
Why do we have 2 hours during lunch?
Lama lo.
I understand now why we have 2 hours on Friday night.
Right. The answer is that Midrabanan, we've taken Zochat Yom Shabbat Lekacho, which is the source of the mitzvah of Kiddush, by the way. Zochat Yom Shabbat Lekacho is the biblical source of Kiddush Friday night, and according to the Rambam, it's to say words of Shabbat, and only the Chachamim added the cup of wine to it. But there were other Rishonim, the Ran and others, who say that the Kiddush Friday night biblically is over a cup of wine. It doesn't say wine in that pasuk. It's Torah Shabbat Peh. It's an oral add-on, just like the Rambam also has an oral law add-on that Zochat Yom Shabbat is to articulate, to spell out verbally something about Shabbat. But the Rambam believes that the cup of wine is actually midrabanan. It's a rabbinic add-on. But then the Gemara says that Chazal added or expanded Zochat Yom Shabbat Lekacho to the morning. Because the morning Kiddush for sure is not the Oraita. Everybody agrees with that. And once that came over, so the Lechem Mishnah came over with the ride. Came over with the same package. To show that it's really one package. The Kiddush on the cup of wine and the Shtei Lechem, the Lechem Mishnah, is all part of our fulfillment. And the Rav explained that normally Hamoitzi Lechem Menorah, it starts a meal. I mean, that's why we wash and we make a moitzi, and then the hamoitzi now covers everything else that's going to be served. Even though you ate a little bit of bread, you didn't really want to eat a whole sandwich now, but you're being served a 5 courses of entree and the main and soup and main with a lot of stuff on it and dessert and everything. But the hamoitzi is going to cover your ground. On Shabbos, the Kiddush allows you to have a Sudat Shabbat. The Baruch Gofen, to use the Briska Lamdanim, it's a matir, allows you to eat a Sudat Shabbat. Without Kiddush, you can't eat your meal, your Sudat Shabbat. So the Kiddush in the morning allows you to have a meal, and the Rambam, believe this or not, but the Yemenites still have this till this very day, begins Sudash Lishit with a cup of wine also. Like there's a quasi-Kiddush for Sudash Lishit also, for the same reason. Except the reason why Ashkenazim are a little bit lax about that and don't have a cup of wine for Sudash Lishit is because Sudash Lishit, you should eat it, but if you don't have bread, you can be yoitza with cake, and you can be yoitza with fruits and vegetables, and you can be yoitza with a Dvar Torah. You know that? You can be yoitza Sudash Lishit. People go to a shir between Mincha and Marav, and they physically don't eat Sudash Lishit, and their Sudash Lishit is the shir that they've had. Where does that come from? It comes from a view of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. What do you do on Erev Pesach that comes out on Shabbat? This year, Tavshin Pei Hey, Erev Pesach is on Shabbat. The big shaila is how to be Yotzeh Sudash Lishit. You can't have bread anymore. It's Erev Pesach in the afternoon. You can't have matzah because it's in the afternoon. It's Erev Pesach. We don't eat matzah. So one of the answers is fruits and vegetables. That's all. And the other answer is Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, Shabbos Agol Drasha. Exactly. That's probably why it came about. So Devar Torah. But the Rav's grandfather, Reb Chaim from Brisk, said, don't rely on that view, but you should eat Sudash Lishit. Why? He said because against a shear, you can come up with a great kasha that destroys the whole shear. But against a herring, you can't ask kashas. That's what he said. That was Reb Chaim's idea. It sounds Hasidic, and he was a Class A Litvak. But he said against a herring, he said against a dag maluach, you can't ask a shaila. Okay, so you have here in the poem itself, Rishon hu lemikrai kodesh, Yom Shabbaton, Yom Shabbat Kodesh. This is all Vayikra Kav Gimel. This is the flip side of what Shabbat is. It's the side of Shabbat that it's a moed, it's a Yom Tov. And the moed part, we fulfill it. How do we fulfill it? Al kain kol ish b'yeino yekadesh. By making Kiddush, we assign the status of Kedushat Shabbat as a Yom Tov. And there is a Talmud Yerushalmi, Masechet Psachim, that even has a variant Nusach, Baruch Atah Hashem, Mikadesh Yisrael v'Yom Shabbat. Now, we don't do that. Our bracha is Mikadesh Shabbat. And we show a vast distinction between the Kedushat Shabbat and the rest of the Chagim. But the fact is, the Kiddush that we're making on Friday night is not part of the fact that a Kadosh Baruch Hu made it Kadosh. That we simply say testimony in Vaychulu. So the parak was Vaychulu Shemayim, the preamble for Kiddush. Where does Kiddush start? It starts with Bar Per Gofen. So why do we say v'chulu? We say testimony by Varach Elokim et Yom HaShvi'i v'Kadesh Oto. So some of us start with Yom HaShishi v'chul Hashemayim. That's because the Kabbalists wanted the 4 letters of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Yom HaShishi v'chulu Hashemayim. There's a cute way of sneaking in Shem HaMefurash there. So then some said, well, you can't start a pasuk at the end. So we'll say Vayer Vayvoke quietly because we want to emphasize Yom HaShishi Vaychulu Hashemayim. Those 4 words, Yud Kei Vav Kei. And then some said, 1 second, the pasuk doesn't start with Vayer Vayvoke. It starts with Vayar Elokim et Kol Asher Asav Yinei Tov Ma'od Vayer Vayvoker Yom HaShishi. Okay. You know that the Tunisians have a custom. We saw this in Beersheba when we lived there. They eat couscous on Tuesday and Friday. So why on Tuesday and Friday? So one of the Tunisians explained to me, because on Tuesday it says kitov twice, and what could be better than couscous? And on Friday it says Vayar Elokim et Kol Asher Asav Hinei Tov Ma'od. What could be better than couscous? Okay, but some say this in an undertone also, belachash. Vayar Elokim et Kol Asher Asav Hinei Tov Ma'od. But most birchonim it says Vayer Vayvoker in lachash, but loud Yom HaShishi Vaychulu Hashemayim. That's the get. But the original custom was just to say Vaychulu Hashemayim as testimony, and that's why even people who sit for Kiddush usually stand for Vaychulu, because testimony has to be said standing up. And then they'll sit down for the bracha of Bor Pe'agafen and Kiddush. Yeah. Right? In the morning. Okay, so these customs are now outgrowths of compromises and merger and mishmash of different customs and so on. Let's speak halachically. I say very publicly, I don't do it according to halacha, because I do it the way my father did it, my grandfather and grandfather, which is the Kabbalistic way of standing for all the Kiddush. The halacha is you're supposed to sit for all the Kiddush, but not for Vaychulu. Vaychulu is Eidut, but Kiddush is supposed to be said. Why? Ein Kiddush ela b'mkom su'udah. Kiddush is where you eat. That's a halacha. Why did the Kabbalists stand by Kiddush? So Rav explained it once, because the Kabbalists added another idea to Kiddush, and that is to welcome a Kadosh Baruch Hu into the home. And that happens Friday night, not Shabbos morning. So that explains this custom of sitting by Shabbos morning correctly, but Friday night to stand because a Kadosh Baruch Hu is entering into our abode, and it wouldn't be right to be sitting. Do you remember, we just read last Shabbat Vayera, right? V'hu yoshev petach ha'ohel kechom hayom. Avraham Avinu was sitting, but then Rashi says, Yashav Ktiv, Yud Shin Bet. Doesn't say Yud Vav Shin Bet. It's not written Yoshev. We read it Yoshev. He is sitting. It's written, it's spelled in the past tense, Yud Shin Bet, that he was sitting. Yeah, he was sitting, but now he's standing. Why is he standing? Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu came. So a Kadosh Baruch Hu enters, you get up and stand up. That's why the halacha is that when the Sefer Torah is walking around, we have to stand up. It's not because of the covered Sefer Torah, because the Sefer Torah's movement reflects a Kadosh Baruch Hu moving. So when the Aron Kodesh is opened, Ganusbu, you don't have to stand up. I didn't say anything heresy now. When the Aron Kodesh is opened, you don't have to stand up. You have to stand up when the Torah is in motion. So we generally stand up when they open the Aron because we're going to take the Sefer Torah out, but not always. For Anam Zemirot or other times on your Rosh Hashanah Kippur, it's a Gabai's nightmare of having people open and close the Aron Kodesh. Nila. I always announce in Shul, anybody that's weak can sit down during the whole Nila, even though the Aron Kodesh is open. You know when there's a problem? During Simchas Torah, when people are dancing with the Sefer Torah, and people are sitting on the side. That's wrong. They're not allowed to sit down when the Sefer Torah is in motion. So that's a michshol. That's a real problem. But the fact that there's awareness of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's presence that demands to be standing. That's where the Kabbalists came into the picture with the. So in the poem itself, it says, Al Kain Kol Ish B'Yano Yekadesh, Al Shtei Lechem Yivtzu Timimim. It all goes together. Kiddush and Lechem Mishnah, as we explained, is all forged together as one point. And then the next stanza, as we'll see it next week in Mitzvah Hashem, the next stanza, he goes over to the idea of Onik Shabbat and Kavod Shabbat, and there's still what to do on this page. So you're invited to hand the page back to me, and I'll be happy to bring it next week. You want to bring it, and please bring it next. You want to keep it? Please bring it next week. Okay.